Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A serious topic for you today. Let's do it. Redditors who have lost someone to suicide. How have you dealt with it? Some of these are a little not safe for work. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I lost my identical twin and only sibling to suicide. We had a bond that only other identical twins could understand, and his loss absolutely devastated me for years. My mom blamed herself for his death and pretty much lost her mind, and 2 years later, she went into a bathroom at a park, luckily in the middle of the day on a weekday, and doused herself with gasoline and lit it. She died in the worst possible way. It's just me and Pops now. I used alcohol to self-medicate for a couple of years, but when I was at my lowest, I decided to try an ayahuasca retreat. That really made a huge difference and allowed me to process the grief that I really was just stuffing. I realized that the reason the pain was so great was because the relationship I had with my bro was so great. And if I had the chance to not go through the pain, but at the cost of never having the memories, I would not take it. The pain was worth it. I feel like going through the grieving and healing process has actually made me a kinder, more loving, more generous person who appreciates life much more than before. It sounds crazy, but in a weird way, the pain has been a gift. I still miss them like crazy, but I know I will see them again. My brother killed himself in January 2022. I just kind of put it in the back of my mind. He wanted to go, so I just think of that, what he wanted, I guess. Can't do anything about it. My daughter dying a couple of months later overshadowed it. My younger cousin committed suicide 2 years ago. He was more like a brother to me. I have no siblings and grew up incredibly close with my cousins, him and his sister. We just passed the 2-year mark last week, actually. He was 23 when he passed. I'll spare the details, but it was gruesome, and I saw the aftermath. Cleaned it up, actually, even. As you can imagine, it was incredibly traumatic. I got myself into an online support group for those who lost someone to suicide almost right away. In the immediate weeks after his passing, I found that to be immensely helpful to talk to others outside of my immediate bubble who were going through similar. I leaned on my family and friends and banded even closer with my family. I made sure to still get myself out and keep myself busy and do things I loved because even though it was hard, he wouldn't have wanted me or any of us to stop living just because he had. In the 2 years since, we've also started a foundation in his honor. He suffered from multiple things for many years, some of which were invisible illnesses that the doctors didn't always take so seriously. So, our mission is to improve the care in healthcare and to shed light on those struggling with similar illnesses. We also hold a memorial baseball game for him, which is now annual, and my husband and I also both got tattoos for him. These things make me feel like we're carrying on his memory and legacy, and has also helped me get through the grief. None of these stories are going to be happy, but at least your family and friends are doing something in his honor and name to try to at least raise awareness. So that's good, and it's great. Thank you. Oh boy. Grandfather shot himself when I was 3, but I didn't find out until I was 18. Dad always said he was sick and just gave up. I was mad and lost it a little when I found out. Uncle hung himself when I was 15 to 16. He was a drug addict in and out of jail, but we were close when I was younger. That one made me sad, I think about him a lot. Friend in the military hung himself in May. We all had a big get-together, and a few other people in my unit and myself drove 10 plus hours to his funeral in West Virginia. Family member who I wasn't close with but was around during family reunions and holiday dinners at my great-grandmother's house shot himself in his squad car after buying groceries in June. Started to question my sanity a little after that one. A childhood friend of mine that was in the Air Force strangled himself in July. Due to other stuff going on at the time, I wasn't able to fly home and attend his funeral, and that still haunts me. I visit him on Veterans Day and Memorial Day when I can. At this point, I needed therapy, and badly. I was questioning who was August's victim. 2012 was a horrible year. Dad shot himself last year, and it kinda threw me into a horrible depression cycle for a bit. We had a weird relationship, but he was still my dad, and he knew what suicide does to the people around you. So I'm mad at him, but he's not hurting anymore, so it's bittersweet. Time heals. It doesn't help you forget, but it does get easier as time goes on. You learn to live with that hole and you adapt, at least in my experience. I keep tally marks on my wrist that I dread adding to, but I look at it and remember that it's not worth giving my pain to the people that love me. One day at a time. I did dwell on it in the past, wondered what I could have done differently, replayed our last interaction over and over in my head. Nothing changed, and though therapy, I realized it's best to think of the good times instead. If I could have changed their decision, I would have, but it wasn't my decision to make. The pain of their life was so unbearable, they didn't want to suffer anymore. My brother shot himself maybe 20 years ago. It actually made me appreciate my own life more. Anytime I see a sunset or rise, I think of him and the fact that he shortchanged himself. Anytime his favorite football team wins, or anytime The Rock makes another movie, his favorite wrestler, I think of how he would have enjoyed it, but doesn't get to now. But I get to enjoy them. I get to see that sunrise, hold my wife's hand, talk to my kids on the phone. He missed out, but I don't have to. I miss him, and he's always in my heart. But he shortchanged himself, and he cheated us. It's not right what he did, and if you're thinking of it, you should think again. This is likely all you get. There's probably not a heaven to look forward to. Don't trade what you have for possibly nothing in return. Enjoy what you have, and who you have to share it with for the short amount of time that you have it. Cousin's boyfriend killed himself a few months ago. He was family to me, as I've known him for 20 years since I was 3. He was the kindest, gentlest man ever. He had already attempted to off himself once, but survived. He knew I went through a rough patch at some point, and the few words we exchanged about it made me feel so understood. He was mentally ill, but he really did get all the help he could. In the end, he said he had fought for those around him, but that he was tired and wanted to be free. I was in the middle of the end of term exams and somehow managed to not fail a single one. Sobbed through cramming and puked before and after the exams. Passed out twice, too. His parents did not want anyone at his funeral, so I never got to say goodbye. I've yet to mourn him, but he showed me the aftermath of suicide, and that it is one thing that finally stopped my brain from constant ideation. I still feel the unbearable pain of the world having lost such a good person, but I really hope the peace he found was worth it. Again, these are all going to be sad, so not much you could say, but like you said in your last sentence, hopefully they did find whatever peace that they were looking for. My grandfather hung himself in 2009 at the age of 86. My grandmother had died long before I was even born, so he lived by himself. I always had a suspicion he might have been lonely, but he never showed it, as he was a stoic man. He was incredibly strong, stubborn, and frugal, and never liked visiting doctors. The coroner said he might have had a cancerous growth in his stomach, but who knows really. He had put pictures on the kitchen table of my brothers, me, my parents, uncle, and aunt. He must have been looking at all of us, reminiscing about the good times we did have. I can't even begin to fathom what he must have been thinking about in the moments leading up to his final decision. The depression he must have felt from the loneliness and his health slowly deteriorating. The day after it happened, I was meant to go to a play with school. Ironically, it was a play about Dante's 9 Circles of Hell. The story itself didn't captivate me in the moment, but there was one scene where the lead actor broke down crying in utter despair. It was such a convincing performance, and I cried right along with him. A memorable yet strangely beautiful moment. In the weeks afterwards, I definitely went through a lot of existential questions in my head, but I could not cry anymore. He was an old man, and he made the decision to take his own life. He lived on his terms, and he died on his terms. I think it's particularly terrible for my uncle, who had to find him. Either way, part of me understands what brought him to do what he did. I loved him, and I liked what impact he has had on my formative years. Rest in peace, Opa. I was 12 when my dad shot himself. At the very beginning, I could neither move, speak, see, hear, nothing. I was just in a bubble inside my own head trying to understand what happened. It took 2 weeks for me to be able to leave the apartment again. In those 2 weeks, I stayed as close to my family as I possibly could. After that, I went back to school. And I was immediately bullied about it. Once I got home that day, I just threw everything down and locked everyone and everything out of my mind, aside from one thing: gaming. Gaming helped me getting through the worst of it at the start. And while playing with someone when I was 16, I saw the guy had a cute red wolf as his profile picture. I then asked him about it, and he said he's a furry. I got curious and looked into it. I then, after some weeks of looking around this fandom and talking to a few more of them, I officially joined the fandom. And those people helped me getting through this and some other tough times. Short version, gaming and the furry community. Father committed suicide when I was 15. You may make peace with the loss, but I still needed counseling. It's an effed up death because it could have been prevented, and as a kid, you tend to blame yourself. As an adult, I knew it wasn't my fault, but I've always lived with an emptiness that nothing can fill, and I'm in my 40s now. Also, had my friend who was living with me shoot himself. He was a severe alcoholic. Suicide ends the person's pain and gives it to friends and family. Close childhood friend killed himself in summer 2019. We had just played D&D the night before, and the last thing I remember him saying was how much he looked forward to the next game. It came out of the blue for a lot of us, but he had been struggling with mental health for a long time, just completely refused to talk about it with anyone. I took it very hard. Felt like the reality check of a freight train. Been struggling with mental health myself for as long as I can remember. First expressed suicidal thoughts at 14, so I truly understood the pain he went through, and it just wrecked me. A lot of other BS surrounding it that made it worse, but I'll try to keep this shorter. First time I understood what true grief feels like. Never lost anyone close to me before that at all. Deep, heavy emotional pain coupled with complete hopelessness because there's no turning back. What happened was absolute and final. It is so cliche to say, and rarely what a sad, depressed person wants to hear, but it gets better with time. Instead of imagining the pain he went through, I'd start thinking about fun memories we had. Crying right now just talking about it, but it's a different kind of pain. I'm still struggling badly with life in general, but mentally I'm stronger than ever. Because if anything, I absolutely effing refuse to give up for him. When I was 16, a family friend I grew up with decided it was all too much. When I say grew up together, we all spent every weekend together from the ages of 3 until about 12. Every Friday night, fish and chips at either one of our houses. He was a couple of years older than me, his younger brother about the same age. He did it a week before his brother's birthday. We hadn't seen each other in a few years as our parents had a disagreement a few years prior and didn't talk as much. It was still hard though, and I still remember the funeral 7 years later. It broke my parents. It was the first time I'd seen my father cry. I still think about him at least once a week. It also brought our families back together as we all share most of each other's childhood. It's been 12 years since one of my best friends died from negligence. He put a nicotine patch on to see if he could get a high, had an allergic reaction, and his throat swelled up, and he died in his living room. No one else was home. I've dealt with it by living unconditionally and trying my best to remember him and carry what a big legacy he would have wanted to be carried. We called each other brothers. I'll never forget getting notified of his death. As an 18-year-old, it's crushed me. I was with my girlfriend at the time, and I got the call from a random person and started bawling. It was a Friday afternoon, and I was supposed to hang out with him the next day, and I'll never hear his goofy laugh or witness his hilarious antics ever again. He wanted to be an underwater welder. What hurt was everyone went to his funeral, super small town of 1,500, and people acted like they knew him or they were best friends, but none of them even cared about him and actively talked about him behind his back. I love you, Calvin. Rest in peace. Join the Navy? I suppose we weren't super close, but it still effed me up when it happened. When I was 13, I met him at a summer camp and was immediately awestruck by his outgoing personality. He was 14 when I met him, I think. He was the type to light up a room and get everyone laughing. He genuinely was the center of attention, and I loved him for it. I wanted to be his close friend because he was so cool. Then, fast forward about a year. I was watching the local news when there was a segment about a missing boy. It was the same teen from camp. They searched for him for 3 days before they found his body in a ditch. He had overdosed on pills and crashed his car, with a suicide note in the seat. A few months later, the family held a public service for him. Everyone from camp showed up, including me. Hundreds of people for this one boy. Nobody knew he was struggling. I think about him from time to time when I'm enjoying life. I struggle from depression, so I really get it, I do. But I just can't believe he traded his life for nothing in return. He was so young, only 15. But I've lived so much life since his passing. I've found love and friends and traveled and started a career. He opted out on that. He decided not to give life a chance. And for what? An eternity of nothing? I'm still angry at him and sad for him, and I wish I could have seen him grow up like my friends. The force he would have become. I don't think I'll ever be over it. It showed me how invisible this pain is, that you never truly know someone's internal struggle. But it also showed me just how many people suicide impacts. I didn't know him that well, but I still think about him, and it's been years. I still remember the memorial with hundreds of people, and my dad telling me, "I know you struggle with these thoughts, but this is what happens." It can feel inconsequential when you're in the moment, but suicide ripples far. Rest in peace, Sam. May you find what you were looking for.